All right, Psalm 62. Let's call this one, Will I Remember God Alone? In this psalm, where that phrase is going to come up at least twice, but that thought is going to seem to come up at least 4 times, where David is going to talk about twice how his trust is in God alone in this situation, where once again he is surrounded by enemies. But David is, like we said, a man who does not seem to narrowly focus on his own interest, even when he's going through it. And so he is going to encourage others who hear this psalm to also trust in God at all times, as he is going to begin in verses 1 and 2 to say, For God alone my soul waits in silence. Beginning in verse 2, he only is my rock and my salvation. As in verses 3 and 4, as we mentioned, he is going to describe the enemy that is surrounding him as he goes on in verse 5 to once again say, For God alone my soul wait in silence, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation. As he ends up in verse 7, speaking more about how God is his personal refuge, but he transitions in 8 and 9 to talk about more globally. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us, helping us understand that one of the needless burdens we can carry in times of isolation is believing that talking to God doesn't matter because we can't see him. But as we mentioned before, Jesus taught something we have heard probably since we were yay high, and that is the truth will set you free. And at a certain point, in order to relieve ourselves of unnecessary baggage, we got to take him at his word. And if we got nobody else we can tell the truth to, part of the advantage in prayer is at least being able to vent fully and candidly to God, because one of the ways in which the enemy keeps us unnecessarily burdened is making us feel that the sincere truth, respectfully stated, is something that's off limits. We've called it a prison of our own fiction. And in past chapters, we've talked about the ways in which I can compound my fears by being afraid to acknowledge that I am afraid. And so that same truth that has the potential to free me from my fears has the potential to free me from my enemy's version of reality, which is important in this particular passage because verses 3 through 4 say, How long will all of you attack a man and batter him? Verse 4, they only plan to thrust him down from his high position. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. And so David is in front of an audience that seems to only be happy if he is failing. But the strength of performing for an audience of one, thus the title God Alone, is that your success is not dependent upon the love that you can get from the crowd. Understanding that back in Psalm 22, we noticed that as David was expressing his feelings of isolation, feelings that Jesus quoted from the cross, there was a level of joy they could have gotten from the crowd, but the crowd was against them at this point. And so there was another level of strength that they seemed to be able to access in their love for the crowd, a crowd that was not necessarily even in their presence, or in the case of Jesus, was simply represented by a small number of folks who were cheering for him but couldn't help him out of his ordeal on the cross. And now we seem to be seeing another level of inspiration that David here is getting when he realizes that no matter what is around him, he is performing for an audience of one, and that audience of one has the power to make him perform even in a hostile environment. Verse 11 and 12, concluding, once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God, and that to you, O Lord, belongs steadfast love. For you will render to a man according to his work. And so no matter what might please the crowd that is in front of him, David, in this circumstance, faced with a crowd that the only thing he can really do to please is to basically fail. And so unless he just wants to fail just to please the crowd, he realizes that he has invested in a lifestyle that has the potential to pay off in exactly this situation. Going back to the previous chapter where we saw David committing to perform his vows even when things weren't going his way. At a time like this where David is in a hostile situation, he doesn't need anyone other than God to allow him to perform at his best, no matter how hostile the environment.